All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are tracking down a fascinating, real-time economic mystery. We're looking at a country that is absolutely crushing its macroeconomic targets, growing at a totally enviable pace, and yet it's simultaneously facing a really surprising flight of foreign capital. We are, of course, talking about India in 2025. It's honestly a classic financial whodunit. I mean, how can a nation's economy be so fundamentally strong while international investors seem inexplicably hesitant to commit their fresh capital? Well, we're going to unpack exactly why this is happening, looking at the global forces pulling money away and the domestic hurdles keeping it out.
Okay, let's dive into this contradiction. Because on one hand, India's economic resume right now is practically flawless. We're looking at a full-year real growth rate projected at over 7%, inflation is totally contained, banks are healthy, and corporate balance sheets are extraordinarily strong. But then, you look at the other hand, and the numbers show glaring hesitation from the outside world. By mid-January 2026, the Indian rupee had depreciated by 5.4% against the US dollar. And if you look between April and December 2025, foreign portfolio investments saw a net outflow of $3.9 billion. It's wild. The macro-level success simply isn't translating into currency stability or a rush of foreign capital like you'd expect. The official economic survey of 2025-26 sums up this exact situation perfectly. It states, and I quote, "The paradox of 2025 is that India's strongest macroeconomic performance in decades has collided with a global system that no longer rewards macroeconomic success with currency stability, capital inflows, or strategic insulation." That is incredibly profound. It's basically telling us that the old rules of the global economy, where good numbers automatically equal the flood of investment, have fundamentally changed. India is practically punching below its weight on the global financial scales right now, but not because its economy is weak, it's because the global system itself is shifting right beneath our feet.
Section 1. The Global Suspect, Geopolitics and the AI Boom.
To actually solve this mystery, we first need to zoom out and look beyond India's borders. We really have to examine the macroeconomic environment of the entire planet. Because look, capital doesn't just exist in a vacuum, right? It flows to wherever it perceives the absolute best mix of safety and high returns. Which leads us to a literal multi-billion-dollar question. If the money isn't flowing into one of the world's fastest-growing major economies, where exactly is it going? What forces out there are so powerful that they can distract global investors away from a nearly guaranteed 7% growth rate?
Well, the answer comes down to a potent combination of a high-tech obsession and plain old geopolitical fear. First off, U.S. bond yields have been highly elevated recently, and that creates a massive flight-to-safety magnet for global cash. But honestly, more than that, capital is just being aggressively sucked right into the artificial intelligence supply chain. We're seeing massive, unprecedented investments pouring specifically into the U.S., Taiwan, and Korea. Just to put this in perspective, tech companies have literally moved over $120 billion off their balance sheets using special purpose vehicles just to fund these massive, highly leveraged AI bets. Add to this the rising geopolitical tensions where global trade is now entirely shaped by national security. Countries are doing what's called friendshoring, moving supply chains to political allies rather than just looking for the cheapest producers. So capital is either hiding in safe havens or it's gambling heavily on the AI frontier. And the sheer volatility of these flows is pretty striking. Foreign portfolio investments, which is basically the hot money moving in and out of Indian equities and debt, experience these dramatic spikes and severe drops. It really proves just how incredibly sensitive these flows are to global risk-off sentiment. The moment U.S. interest rates shift or anytime there's a geopolitical scare, foreign investors immediately pull this portfolio capital out of emerging markets like India to cover their positions elsewhere. And they do this entirely regardless of India's rock-solid domestic performance.
Section 2. The Domestic Suspect, Structural Costs and Policy Predictability.
But we can't just blame it all on the rest of the world. A good investigator looks at every single angle. So what are the micro-level structural issues within India's own markets that are causing foreign investors to hesitate, even when the broader macroeconomic picture looks so inviting? Well, a really crucial point here is understanding a concept called a risk premium. Imagine you're a bank and you're lending money to two different people. Person A saves way more than they spend. Person B consistently spends more than they earn and relies on credit cards to bridge the gap. You're going to charge Person B a higher interest rate, right? Well, that is India on a macro scale. Because India runs a persistent current account deficit, meaning it imports more goods than it exports, it structurally relies on foreign savings to balance the books. By definition, global capital demands a risk premium for this, which inherently makes investment in India more expensive to finance from the get-go. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that we can see the real-world impact of that hesitation plain as day. While gross foreign direct investment inflows are actually remaining decently high, the repatriation of profits is rising significantly. Now, repatriation just means foreign companies are taking their profits out of India and sending that cash back to their home countries. This tells us a very specific story. Established foreign companies are successfully harvesting profits from their Indian operations, but they are actively choosing not to reinvest those profits as fresh capital. They are holding back.
So why are they holding back? The sources outline some very specific, actionable grievances. Look, foreign direct investors aren't just looking for a massive market. They absolutely need policy stability. They need to know, for sure, that the rules of the game aren't going to change halfway through a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year project. Right now, they face high execution risks due to complex local regulations and a lot of bureaucratic friction. What these global investors are practically begging for is a single, empowered center of accountability. They want one clear authority that can provide customized, time-bound solutions and just clear the path for them across the various government departments.
But here's the thing. Despite those bureaucratic headaches, the underlying fundamentals present a case for just massive potential. When you actually calculate the risk-adjusted return on inward FDI, which basically measures the return you get against the volatility you endure, India ranks second globally among major economies. It has a ratio of 7.2. That comfortably beats Mexico, South Korea, the US, and Germany. India really does offer highly attractive, stable yields without exposing investors to extreme earning swings. The reward is clearly there, it's just the friction that needs to be removed.
Section 3. The Resolution. Toward Strategic Indispensability.
Okay, so we've got a clear diagnosis of the global headwinds and the domestic structural frictions. The question is, how does India transition from a country with great potential that investors are kind of hesitant about into a country that global capital literally cannot afford to ignore? Well, the Economic Survey lays out a very concrete four-step action plan. Step 1, fix that bureaucratic maze we talked about by establishing a single, empowered center of accountability at the highest levels of government. Step 2, stop waiting for investors to come knocking. India needs to actively identify and partner directly with the massive anchor companies of global value chains. Step 3, enforce strict policy stability. They suggest every single policy change must pass a strict necessity test, so investors finally have that multi-year predictability. And Step 4, actually mitigate corporate execution risks. It's just not enough to announce incentives, they have to be implemented reliably so companies can actually bank on them.
And the ultimate goal of all these steps? It's a fundamental shift in India's global identity. Because right now, India is at risk of remaining what's called a connector country. Basically, just a service provider to the developed world, which leaves it super vulnerable to global shocks. The strategy outlined here aims for something much stronger, defensive sovereignty. This means preventing supply shocks by actually building things locally. But even more importantly, it aims for offensive leverage. This means becoming so deeply integrated into high-tech domains, we're talking advanced manufacturing, AI, critical minerals, that the world simply has to come to India. It's about completely transforming from a vulnerable participant into a strategically indispensable power.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. India clearly has the market size, the demographic dividend, and the proven macroeconomic strength. But as we've seen, the global system is totally unforgiving, and capital is highly contested. The window of opportunity for India to reshape its standing is open right now, but it definitely won't stay open forever. So will India successfully execute these deep structural reforms to become strategically indispensable to the global economy? Or will it remain a paradox, boasting incredible domestic growth while remaining forever vulnerable to the shifting, volatile tides of global capital? That wraps up our explainer for today. Keep exploring.